Awesome. So, as we said, I was really excited to get you on. Just because of like, not just your experience in the health and fitness industry, not just because you're a like insanely knowledgeable dude, but a little bit the fact that I said just before coming on air that you're my age, you're like what, 31 now? And like you seem to have like 140 years of sort of life experience in such a short space of time. Um, so I just want to kind of delve into a little bit about what it is you feel that's allowed you to kind of get so much out of so little in terms of time. Is there any opening comments before I go into any specific question?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think my hand was forced. Much to our discussion, similar to your case, where it's just like, you had a plan and you were walking to the edge and you're like, and then someone just came up with a swift boot in the middle of your back and just like kicked you right off the ledge. And you're like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to figure this out before I hit the ground. So yeah, I honestly think a lot of people, for better or for worse, might not have that swift kick. And I don't know where I'd be if I didn't. So like, yeah, it's tough. Saying yes to a lot of things has definitely helped. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. And I was just in a position where I didn't have an option but to say yes to a bunch of things that may have been terrible ideas. But yeah, I mean, if there was an opening statement, I think it would be that, like, to retrospectively look back at the last like decade, I've just probably said yes to things where maybe other people have been more conservative and thought about it, where and some of them being forced on myself, probably just as a consequence of my own poor decisions at times. But yeah, that would be something that if I were to impart anything, a takeaway before we even started, I think that would probably be a common thread that we'll see, where I just go, yeah, fuck it, see what happens, and then we sort the rest out as we go.
It's amazing when you sort of look back on stuff like that. Like you tend to forget that sometimes the best things in life are saying yes to stuff that are totally scary. That's like so far out your comfort zone. And when you come into a new decision, you mentioned similar to my situation of like getting that kick, like all the point until I got the kick into my latest sort of like part of my career, like I didn't think about moving to Hong Kong randomly. Never been to Asia in my life, but let's just come and have some, warm water and cold chicken. Like I don't remember the time I moved to London and did the commute for 2.5 hours each way. You sort of forget those things. So it's probably good to look back and just think, right, how many stuff have I said yes to that's actually been the best things I've ever done?
Yeah, and it becomes easier too. Like I think there's a compounding effect where the more you say it, the more you want to say it, and then it almost becomes like an addictive pace where if there's not enough things, then you go making your own trouble, and you're just like, well, all right, let's see what I can force onto myself if there's nothing kind of knocking at my doorstep. But I think the first couple are definitely difficult. Like I couldn't imagine the Hong Kong thing. Like Hong Kong to me, even at the point in which I went to Hong Kong, I was like, this is a different universe. Like this is completely insane. But the more you do it, you get a little bit of experience on your belt, and you can say yes to anything. You'll be like, all right, like, we'll just sort this out when we get there. And the more tools you sort of have as a byproduct of all the past times where you're like, yeah, no, but it couldn't have been bad at this one time, right? So it's nice to calibrate your appetite for risk with some really close calls.
I think there's elements as well as like we don't want that safety blanket. You mentioned sort of like moving out to Hong Kong, and sort of my experience is like I was told by somebody who I worked with previously, saying that you should go out there first, get to know the place, see if you like it. I'm like, I don't want to, because there's one of two things happen. Either I love it and I've got all this excitement, and then I've got to wait for 3 months, and then I go again, and losing that excitement, or I go and I hate it and I don't want to go back. I'd rather go and just have to make it work, like sink or swim.
Yeah, I've had that a handful of times, and I don't know. Again, I don't know if I've ever been afforded the luxury to like be able to sniff it out, to test the waters. Like, and the thing is, it frees up so many. If you can make big decisions like that, smaller decisions that are otherwise relatively so mundane are so easy. Like, I purchased a vehicle recently, and I took it out of not recently, a year ago. It seems like very recently. And I took it out of the lot for a test drive, and my phone fell between the seat and the center console. and I was able to fit my hand down and pick it up with zero issues. And I just pulled it back into the lot, and I was like, right, we'll get this one. He's like, what? I'm like, yeah, no, it's perfect. That's the best feature of any vehicle I've ever driven. I could fit my fucking hand down the side and grab my phone. It's like, that's all I need to know. They're like, don't you want? I'm like, no. Can we just do the thing where I give you the money and I just leave? Because it's like, yeah, I have other decisions to make rather than what car I drive every day. So it is nice because the magnitude or the relative magnitude really helps you go, right, okay, I'm going to put the rest of my decision-making process into perspective and maybe like interrogate it a little bit. And the rest, everything else in your life is chicken or fish. Who gives a fuck? Like if it's not going to matter in 5 minutes or not going to matter in 5 years, I'm not spending 5 minutes on it.
Is there a criteria as you got like crazy busy now, compared to where you would have been in like 10, 15 years ago? Is there a different criteria now what you say yes to?
Yeah, good question. I think like new novel, like I'm a big on traveling. So if there's like a location that I haven't been to, I think that's really like that. If it's a tie break, like let's say there's a weekend and there's two things going on, and one is maybe a lesser, hard to quantify, but like a potentially like a lesser opportunity from a career standpoint, but it's in a part of the world I haven't been in before. That's my ultimate tie break. Like, can I experience new things? Can I be in a place where I don't know the language? Like it is really coming down. Like if I had to go to Florida again, like don't get me wrong, I love Florida. My closest friends live in Florida, but I know Florida. Like I've driven up and down that state 1,000 times in the last couple of years. And it's great. But if someone goes, hey, do you want to come to Belgrade in March? Absolutely, I want to go to Belgrade. So just, I think that's ultimately it. Like just using fitness or whatever the hell we talk about is like a conduit to just get access. Like my hand is stamped. Like, why are you in Belgrade? That's a great question. I think to talk about lifting weights, but I don't know Serbian. So I think that's ultimately for me, like the criteria now is, can I just go see more of the world? Like, I think that's really it. Can I get to a region that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to go to? So I think above all else, that's it.
It's so interesting you said Belgrade. Of all the places in the world, I could 100% get you an invite to Belgrade, because I've become the unofficial trainer of Serbia thanks to my client Miku, who's absolutely killing it. He's just sending me people left, right, and centre, from gym owners to everything else. So if you want a chance to go to Belgrade, I can make that happen.
Oh no, it's happening. It's happening in April of next year. I had a guy reach out, and that was sort of like my decision making. Like I was thinking of a time where it's like, okay, where have I had this? Like, yes, like this, I have to pick between two. And it's literally like, I had this guy reach out who owns a gym in Belgrade. And I was like, look, I don't care about the money, just whatever, if we can scrape it together, if we can't, if not, we'll figure it out. But I want to go to Serbia. So yeah, it's where a lot of my friends are from that part of the world. And it's, I don't know, like, especially recently, some of the trips I've made where maybe they're more contentious or historically more contentious parts of the world, and just to see them firsthand is like pretty wild, because you can know it. I can listen to my buddy Igor talk about Croatia and Serbia and Macedonia and Albania until he's blue in the face. And I've heard it, all my closest friends are Serbian, but I feel like you'll never really get to know a place until you actually go. So it's like, yeah, fuck it, we'll make it happen.
So like going into this sort of the travel stuff, obviously, you had your practice, you worked at Apple, you worked at many like universities. How did this transition into like World Tour Jordan Shallow? Like, how did this even come about?
Yeah, so I was living, and it's funny, I was looking at the calendar yesterday, the day before. It's been about 3 years of pretty much constant travel. I would say a little bit longer than that, but as far as like really living out of my suitcase completely on the road, I think it started, I mean, I traveled a lot as a kid. My parents were avid that whenever they could save up enough money to go anywhere, but it was like, you go to Mexico for March break or whatever. And I think one year at Christmas, we went to Jamaica. I played hockey in Europe as a kid. So like traveling has always been instilled. Like my parents had moved far away from where we were actually born. So like my family is born on the island of Newfoundland in Canada. So they moved to the mainland, and growing up, like it was always, whether we had to go see grandma, it was, a 6-7 hour flight. So I always traveled a lot as kids, as much as we could really afford to. And then up until like recent history, I was working in California, was married, got divorced because I was traveling a fair, I mean, amongst other things, I was traveling a fair amount just with like powerlifting and then trying to get sort of the education stuff off the ground. It was, I would go anywhere. Like, again, I would just say yes. I would go anywhere that would have me speak or listen to me speak. So started probably mid to early, no, even before that, 2016, 2017, I started competing in powerlifting, and then I would get opportunities. I think my third meet was the Arnold Classic in Melbourne, Australia, and I got reached out to help finance my trip over there by doing a couple seminars, and 2 in Melbourne and 1 in Brisbane. And ever since then, it was like, okay, I guess this is a way to help kind of meld these 2 worlds together and kind of finance my powerlifting hobby. So I would say, yeah, 2000, I want to say March 2017, it's 2018, it started. I did the Arnold Classic and hosted my first seminar at PTC South Melbourne. There's a 3-hour seminar. I think I lost 6 months of sleep trying to sort out how I was going to arrange it, and did 3 that year when I competed, and started doing sporadic ones throughout the US and Canada in the time between. And the next year I went out and I did 9. I did 9 and competed, and was traveling a fair bit at the time, domestically within the US and Canada. And I would say after that, it was really like, okay, this is something I do now. And then I got the Good Life fitness contract. I did some stuff with Ben Pekulski. So did a few laps around the world there, and just going wherever there's an audience really was the initial impetus to getting on the road. Was there's a room full of people that want to listen to me talk about lifting weights. Okay, where are these crazy people? And the usual ports of call, right? And I think we both can kind of pinpoint the high density, higher level thinking fitness markets. Like UK is obviously really big, Australia is really big, Canada and the US. But then you attain some level of critical mass, and much to the help of a Good Life Fitness, I was able to see the majority of Canada. Ultimate Performance is how we sort of got linked up, so that kind of put me more international. And then after that, it kind of became a little bit more a la carte, in the sense that if I wanted to see a certain part of the world, I could probably write it off as a business trip and find someone with a gym somewhere that would let me crash. And yeah, so I mean, it's always kind of been, into your original question, it's always been something that I've enjoyed doing. I've liked the idea of traveling, just never really had the means or a good enough excuse to. Like, traveling was always a vacation, right? Traveling was always like, okay, at Christmas when everyone has time off, we are going to go to X, Y, and Z. But now it's hard to parse out what's vacation and what's work these days. So and that's a nice melding of the lines. Like, it's a pretty nice place to live. Because I mean, at any point I can have an excuse to travel, or I can have an excuse to work. I just don't know the difference anymore.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing you said at the start of this is that, like, how getting to powerlifting is what opened these doors. And it brings me back to the last call I had with you, and you were talking about, like, the best business advice you gave is just get stuck in and doing something. And do you feel like that powerlifting has really been the thing that sort of like has opened many doors for you, and it's given you some of those lessons that have translated onto like travel and seminars and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything specifically unique about the sport of powerlifting, other than that it is competitive, right? I think it's like there's a certain level of exposure and risks that you take when you put on a fucking singlet at 275 pounds and you're pale as a ghost, and you step in front of a bunch of people wearing like a wrestling unitard and you try and lift a bunch of weights. So I think that right there, like, you get very familiar being like the open guy in the plains, right? Like, you're really just stepping out in front of people. And I think it's a good graded exposure. Like, the best part about powerlifting is I don't have to talk. I can just step out in front of everyone, albeit in weird clothes that I would never wear teaching a seminar or course or giving a lecture or anything. It is a good like first opening, like, oh, this is what it's like to be in front of this many people. Okay, interesting. All right, I get 9 reps of that today, of walking out, making eye contact with random strangers, being out there for 30 seconds and then leaving. So it was almost like a really good way to like inoculate the fear that comes with it, like a graded exposure to overcome the fear of being seen. Which is interesting because in my experience in doing this, I find that the one thing that people want more than anything else is to be seen. But there's such a fear that comes with the lack of control of the situation. Like, I have no idea if people are going to like what I have to say, or if they're going to be offended by dumb bullshit I say, and so I think in retrospect, it was good for a lot of reasons. But I think ultimately it's the subconscious thing, both personally and interpersonally, where it's like, oh, okay, he actually goes up there, right? Like sort of the man in the arena type thing, where it's just like, you can critique him or not, at least he's up there willing to be critiqued. And so I think it's definitely helpful personally, just to, and I wasn't ever like super afraid of public speaking or anything like that. And again, I think it's much like what we talked about earlier. There's a compounding effect of just doing it more often. Like if I've been saying, not the same bullshit, but like if I have some principles that I abide by that I've taken around the world a few times and I haven't really met strong enough critique to sink that idea ship, it's like, well, this thing is pretty seaworthy. But yeah, I think powerlifting, at least in the fitness industry, is it puts some skin in the game. Like I assume risk of the way I think and the way I teach principles around resistance training and biomechanics and anatomy, because I'm using those to my own end, right? So it's not just like sitting back on an IGTV and espousing nonsense into the internet. It's like, no, I'm going to take this nonsense and I'm going to take it to the gym, and I'll report my findings as I come back. And that's true of the way I train myself and train athletes I work with and things like that. So I think it ultimately, there's a lot of layers, both conscious and subconscious, to like how how powerlifting has maybe affected how I view just the simple act of talking in front of crowds, but also I think how the crowd views me being at the front of a room, regardless of like a pedestal or a platform.
I think there's a big thing. I remember when I've not done public speaking to the level and the size of audiences that you have, but running education for years in both in London and in Hong Kong. Like I remember the first time that I did that, and I'm like, I'm like yourself in the sense that I will talk sometimes too much, sometimes offend people, and I have no filter. I'm surprised I'm not cancelled. I'm surprised I'm not sued already by this podcast. But I was relatively nervous the first time I ran like an education workshop, and it was just like it was my manager at the time just going, Simon, you're running this today. I'm like, well, I've got 5 minutes. Yeah, on you go. And that sort of sink and swim, and realizing that like it solidifies what I knew, because it was like, okay, if I've got to say this to this person here and they've got to understand it, then I've got to really understand it. And over time, I found out like more I teach, the better at my craft I tend to get, as you kind of go around it, I suppose.
Yeah, well, also too, you become a concentrate of inquiry, right? Like you become a lightning rod of inquiry. So where you could go into a room of, I don't know, 100 people, and everyone in that room will be privy to the questions and the collective reasoning behind the answer to those questions, whether you're at the helm of that or not. But you go to numerous rooms of 100 people. So there's a disordinate or disproportionate amount of, concentration in one person of what seems to be the large misconceptions of the topics that we teach, where this 100 person room over here is not aware of the plights and struggles of this 100 person room over here, where you abridge this and you get to get a concentrated view of like, oh, people really aren't grasping this, or they're not getting a good base in, anatomy or nutrition or whatever the topic may be. And then you can go away with that and be like, okay, well, how do I better tailor that? Where those two cohorts are blind to the needs or demands of their contemporaries. So it opens up an opportunity if you take it, where it's like, oh, okay, like I'm going to really listen to the rooms that I'm in, because I'm in more rooms than other people. So you do, if you play your cards right, you can definitely use that to your advantage, where it's like, you can start to compound, and I use that word a lot, but you can really compound the interests, and not from like a financial standpoint, but from an actual like what grabs people's attention and intention. You can really compound the interests of your domain, in this case fitness, and start to better tailor sort of what you talk about, how you talk about it, just because you're getting all of these questions. Like you just become like a repository for again, like inquiry, which I think is really like a unique part of being on the other side of the podium. Is like, well, I'm on the other side always, so I'm always getting all of these questions, which is like, now if we've both been doing this for a long enough time, but you'll get a few questions like, how the fuck have I done this in so many places and no one asked that question before? But it's really just like a unique experience that you and everyone else in the room will have, but all the other rooms that you've been in don't have. So how can you bring not only just the answer, but how can you just bring the question out to everyone else? And then obviously, hopefully provide an answer that's somewhat near the point.
Like, how have you found, like, going into sort of like relatively, to some people, complex topics in terms of, functional anatomy and biomechanics, and going to this on a global scale? Like, have you found that you've struggled with certain cultures, or there's been, like you've learned something from a culture where I thought people got this, and then I've gone here, and then it's like no, I need to rethink some stuff. Like, how have you found it taking this global?
Yeah. I mean, I think fitness is really, I don't want to say like whitewash, but it really brings, and social media and the internet have given a certain expectation of like what it is, what are the standards of fitness. So I mean, I'm sure there are audiences I don't reach just because I don't speak Spanish, or I don't speak Italian, or anything like that. But as far as cultural, I think the fitness industry is a culture amongst itself. Like if you're in fitness and you're, I don't know, in Spain or in Italy, if in order to be in fitness, there's certain prerequisites that immediately curtail you to being in my culture, in our culture. So I think fitness itself has become a universal culture that, the language and the hierarchy and the different, whether it's powerlifting, whether it's CrossFit, whether it's physique sports, or however you want to break it up, there's already a certain landscape, like a topography that's just understood if you're in the industry. Because if you don't understand these basic tenets, you're probably not in the industry. Like you're probably not, like, I think maybe a better way to put it is, if the fitness industry creates good exclusion criteria for me, then there's like different analogies and words that you'll use. Like, if I'm in the UK or if I'm in Australia, I'll use cunt a little bit more, and like that'll get a laugh. But other than that, I mean, as far as, being able to talk cross-culturally about this, I think a lot of people are really coming into our culture, and less so us into theirs, at least when we're in the gym. But as far as like relaying more complex topics, I think it's just, I speak a lot in analogies. I speak a lot in comparisons, and trying to draw complex topics back to things that people already have a working understanding of. Like, I think understanding relationships is probably one of the things that's helped me relay concepts. Like, how can I make like apt or adequate like equivalencies? Like, how can I compare what would be I'm trying to think of a stupid analogy that I use. Like, how can I compare getting stabbed, or having a client who got stabbed 3 times over subsequent weekends? How can I compare that to like a a chronic lumbar spine disc herniation and draw it in an equivalent fashion that actually makes sense. Just little things like that, like trying to bring people to the surface, like meet them where they're at and then take them with you. So I mean, that is probably more challenging as far as like when you compare the task of, hey, I need to connect to someone in a certain culture. I find that is difficult, especially if we're just talking about people who are, you know, of a different culture that are also into fitness. If you're into fitness, fitness is the superseding culture in the room that I'm in. I think it's the more difficult challenge is like, well, how is it that in every room I can try and meet everyone where they're at as far as an aptitude level, and then speak where, you know, I'm not boring those that are at a high level and I can give them a little bit more, but I'm not completely giving just haircuts to people that are at a low level. So I think that's the unique challenge of it, as far as being able to like read a room and be able to like, oh, okay, like I'm gonna have to, the baseline level is here, the or the median is here, or the mean is here. How is it that I'm going to fluctuate, you know, without too polar swings, too many standard deviations of concepts too low or too high? I think that's way more challenging than just being like, well, I'm in a different country. Most people kind of get it wherever you're at least if I'm in a place where they're there to listen to me talk.
Yeah, I suppose as well, like, you feel like it's gotten easier over the last few years because now people often come to see you or coming to see a Jordan Shallow course, which means they probably followed you for, you know, a number of months, if not years. They probably know what you're about. They know how you speak. They may have done something online first, but they kind of know a little bit about what you're about and come in at a higher level. Do you find the people you see now are more of a certain quality?
Yeah, especially if we're self-selecting through like a prescript branded in-person weekend. Like we just did a 2-day weekend in Toronto, and it was very much that, like, of the 30 plus students that were there, I would say 90% of them had some familiarity with me, but it becomes like a polar opposite when we're working online now, because now our, you know, the courses that we're teaching are reaching a completely new audience who may not have heard of me. So, you know, I'm perhaps walking on, both from a content standpoint, as far as to not, you know, speak above the mean or median knowledge base of like a new cohort or a new semester. I'm also trying to speak to a mean of sensibility. Like, hey, I'm not going to be super blatant and offensive, but we're in, like, for example, we're in week 7, which is just about the halfway point of this current semester's level 1 class. And like, I know now, like, all right, everyone is kind of with me. I've taken them from week 1 where I was like kind of PC, and I'm like not going to go super inflammatory, or I'm not going to like, you know, go off the rails. And every week I'm just like, where's the limit? How far can I push the envelope? And I'm just watching eyes, like screens and monitors all around me, so I can see everyone's face. And I just want to be able to, like, what is their appetite for just debauchery? Like, how much stupid, because it is, at the end of the day, it is somewhat, it can be boring, right? And the idea is to, at the very least, make it entertaining. Because that's the ultimately that's the landscape that we're competing in, right? Like, you know, infotainment is really what, I mean, fitness in itself is really entertainment to a certain degree, right? So if I'm going to try and, you know, come down into the fitness industry, and not come down, that's a shitty way to organize myself, but come into the fitness industry and be like, all right, I want to elevate the standard of thought process here. It's like, I need to use a palatable vehicle. I need a Trojan horse it with, like, you know, being a little bit irreverent or being a little bit off color, and just something that'll help these concepts stick. But it has been like to your original question, it's easier to talk when we're organizing our own things, because it's very much like people are behind the brand, and that irreverence is part of the brand. So the in-person stuff is giving me a little bit more deference to speak freely, and also to speak freely as far as the content goes, because I know the base level is at least to this degree. Now I can start, you know, extending that olive branch down and bringing them up, hopefully a level or two every weekend. But with the in-person, there's a little bit increased there's increased trepidation, in the sense that, like, I don't even think there's people now who wouldn't know me from hole in the wall, who take this course just because they've heard about the course, not because they've necessarily heard about me or follow me or anything like that. So, early stages, we're really testing the waters as far as like, okay, where do the eyes just start to really open up? Like, oh shit, I shouldn't have said that. And luckily we haven't had any issues or anything like that. And we keep it pretty light and pretty fun, but there has been a noticeable fork in the road of like, the in-person and live lecture stuff online was very kind of similar because the audiences were the same. But now it's like we have, people who have taken, all the courses that we offer. And now there's people who've never even heard of us. So there's a divergence in the delivery that ultimately ends up back in the same place if all goes well.
And I think that's where, say, using analogies, like you mentioned earlier on, becomes really important, right? Because it can help people that come in not knowing you and bring them onto your level or bring them onto your personality style. But even the people that are at a higher standard that come into your courses, like you can hear so many things time and time again. It's just way somebody puts something. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe that stuck. That made so much sense. I remember listening to a podcast you were on where you mentioned about someone with knee pain and you compared it to like a computer game where you see like the little dots on somebody doing like the CGI stuff. I was like, that makes so much sense. Like I've gone through this so many times, but that clicked. And like, that's where those things can sort of piece together, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's fun because that stuff evolves too, which is why I like continuously teach, like at least our level 1 course, like kind of our flagship course. Like I like continually teaching that live because I find different ways to anthropomorphize these concepts. And I think like anthropomorphize is to like make human, like to make real, like to draw an analogy that makes it stick in a sense. So like that motion capture analogy is one that's like relatively new in the last like year, which when I first started teaching, now that I teach a little bit deeper with our level 2, like into like mechanoreceptors and talking a little bit more about the central nervous system, that helps. But even the way that we teach like assessments around the shoulder or the hip or the spine, like there's the language around that, even in the last like 3 months has completely changed just because it's whether it's maybe I'm bored with it. Maybe I just need like a different way to word it because I talk about it so often, but I think it's iterative, and the nice part about not just recording it and slapping it up on the internet for generations to just view the same thing is it keeps it fresh. And I think a lot of it, like the core principle is the same, but how is it that you can use things in current events, like whatever the hell's happening week over week, to somehow draw comparisons into our weird little world of like anatomy and biomechanics. So it's it's definitely been a helpful endeavor as far as just trying to, it's almost like a cue, right? Like the way you describe, the motion capture video game thing, clicking for like that underlying concept. It's the same with a cue, like knees in, knees out is probably a poor example, but elbow tucking on a bench press. I didn't really get it until Ed Cohen said, put your shoulder blades in your back pocket. And I was like, oh, okay. For some reason that resonates. So it's like finding the right cue that links this concept to a conceptual model that makes sense. And, when you start to deal with broader audiences, it's like you need more cues, you need more ways, more links, more tributaries that hopefully can start to bring people into the central concept.
So you mentioned earlier on about like almost filtering up the people that come into Prescript in terms of, like how offensive can I be? How full scale Jordan can I be? And like, how much do you feel that sort of like, you say you haven't had any issues so far, and how much do you feel that's been helped by the level of like, how genuine you come across? Because one of the things I think is made you, I don't want to use the word overnight success because you've done this for like 10, 20 years.
Right. Yeah.
Exploded in popularity over the last like 4 or 5 years has I think a lot to do with how you've come across. It's very genuine in an industry that often isn't. Do you think that's come down to your upbringing? That's given you maybe that self-confidence to be unapologetically who you are, or, do you contribute that to other factors?
Yeah, I mean, definitely I come from a very crass part of the country, like I would say Newfoundland, and probably one of the reasons we get on so well, and like a lot of like Brits get on so well, is where I come from in Canada is very like everyone's just out to have a laugh. Like that's really, and if anything else happens, like if anyone learns anything along the way, that's kind of like a bonus. But really, it's just like you just rip the piss out of each other, and then whatever happens after that is just like, well, that's just a cherry on top. So it is. There's very, you grow up with like thick skin when you're a newfie. Like all my aunts and uncles, like everyone's just constantly just ripping the piss out of everyone. So that's definitely a part of it. But I would say ultimately, I think it's just because I spend so much time in person, because I can't really hide behind, because I would say more often than not, if I see someone or I interact with someone online, I've probably met them in person. So like there's a safety net of like, I don't want to say authenticity, but for lack of a better word, like authenticity, because everyone knows me from being in their gym at some point, just because I've been in so many gyms in so many countries, where the point of contact is, I don't know, for me, it's when I meet someone in real life. And a lot of times I'll meet people in real life and then we'll have like an engagement or like a relationship on social media. So I think that's been ultimately grounding, in the sense that like, I would imagine it would be ridiculously overwhelming to have a dissonant personality digitally versus in real life. But I don't think I would even be allowed to get away with it, if that's the right way to word it, because I've made so many friends in person that everyone's like, "What the fuck is this guy?" I'd be like, "Hey, you're being an idiot." I'm like, "Oh fuck!" Like, so I think I have so many, just because I've been in so many countries. Like those in-person touch points, I think are ultimately like what keep me on track, sort of thing. Because I'll be in a gym where I'll meet someone who'll be like, "Oh, like a falling line." I'm like, that is fucking crazy. That is so weird. And that it's, I don't know. I think that ultimately for me is what keeps the train on the tracks, is just the fact that like, I don't know, you get to show up to gyms and talk to people all day. Like, I don't understand why it's got to be such a, because I know people who work on the internet to a certain capacity, and when I meet them, you're like, oh, this is different. And maybe that's part of it too, like my exposure to the other side of like, especially in this gym. And not to say that there's crazy offenders like that's where I'm at. So I'm currently in Pure Muscle and Fitness, which like most people who work out here make their living to some capacity on the internet. And seeing the dissonance is like, oh, that would suck if that was me. So I think like, having a family upbringing that's just like ridiculously raw and unfiltered, and then also being able to be in person with everyone, and you can't fake it in person, I don't think. Like, I think people always know that people have inherently like a nose for bullshit, and then also being able to be on the receiving end of it from a consumer side, and being not surrounded, but being in places where you see the dissonance of the digital and the actual in-person avatar. You're like, oh, that's really strange. I should probably keep an eye on that, because if that's me, that would fucking suck.
I also think it inspires trust in the business, right? I think that's, I suppose that because you are very, very, you are the same person online as offline, that like there's an element of trust. It's like, okay, I feel like I've got to know what Jordan's about. You meet him, you meet yourself at a seminar and you're like, okay, this is what Jordan's about. As opposed to, there's so many people I've met in the fitness industry. I'm like, you really aren't the same. Like, you really are a keyboard warrior. And like, sometimes it's not even who you think. I'm just like, oh, this is it right.
Right. Yeah. It's unsettling. It's a concept. Here's like, I use an analogy called the uncanny valley to talk about like hyperspecificity and strength conditioning. And I almost look at it like that. Like it's because them digitally, but when you meet them in person, it's like, so the uncanny valley is this phenomenon in robotics that explains our affinity to likeness towards human beings, which is basically like, we don't really like Wall-E, because Wall-E doesn't look enough like a human being. It's just a computer screen with a little track. It's like, well, it's kind of like, again, I'll use the word anthropomorphized. It kind of looks human, but it just not really. It's still, so we don't really like it. But as we scale towards, looking exactly like a human being, we like Minions because they're these little things and they have legs, and they're like, all right, well, it's cute. But then we really like the Simpsons because they look more like humans than Minions, definitely more like humans than Wall-E, but they have 4 fingers and Marge has 5 foot long blue hair. And then we get to this point where we hit like Polar Express. And it's like, hey, it looks like Tom Hanks, but I'm super uncomfortable about it. And that's like where the likeness drops off, where we're actually really close. We're more close to this end of this, let's call it this x-axis of looking just like a human. But there's this valley of like, unless it looks just like us, unless it's like spot on, we cannot tell the difference. Like, we like seeing other people, right? So this is the end of the road. This is the 100% likeness, but like there's this weird valley around like 75, 80%. I'm not sure what the actual numbers are, but where it's like, once you hit like this Polar Express, like this ex machina iRobot, okay, this is getting a little weird, then it drops off. And I feel like people are that of themselves, where like your image of someone's persona is here, and however you've learned that image to be, whether you've learned that image through in-person interaction, or whether you've learned that image or that personification through online. When you see the person work in the other, so say I know someone in person and I see them act online, and I can look at him like, oh, that's Tim, but Tim's doing weird dumb shit. And you're like, whoa, I don't like that. It looks just like Tim. And so you kind of drop into this uncanny valley. Or if you know Tim online and you've never met him in person, you have your persona, your personification, your end of this x-axis is the Tim you know and have learned through social media. And then you meet him in person and he's just not what you thought. And he falls into this valley of like, he looks just like Tim on Instagram, but he's actually kind of a douche. And maybe you would like Tim the douche if you knew him in person and he was the same, because at least it didn't subvert your expectations. So I don't know. I've thought a lot about it, because I have friends that I struggle with to a certain degree, like, because I know their personification or their persona in person, and then I watch them online. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Is this hard? Like, is it hard to like just take the one you mask off and put on like the Instagram mask? Like, it's because I struggle with when I see it. I think that makes me hyper cognizant of it when I'm, online myself, to make sure that I don't fall into this uncanny valley of myself.
Yeah, I totally agree with you in there. And I think for looking back at sort of like my history, I don't know if it's because I'm just more confident in my own values now than I was like 4 or 5 years ago. But like, I spent a lot of time in places that didn't want me to have a personality, didn't want me to have a certain like way of speaking. And to the point now was I don't think I could do that. I don't think I'd rather get cancelled and piss everyone off than portray an image I think people should like online. I don't know. I just don't think I could do it.
I think our age makes a difference too. Like, I was talking to someone about this last week, where it's we grew up at a time where you probably reached some psychological and psychosocial developmental milestones prior to the introduction of like the symbiotic technological relationship, like before the idea of having a digital avatar was even possible. So it's like the fact that you use the words you probably couldn't do it is, I think it's 100% factually true, because you crossed that threshold of your personality before the indoctrination of social media, where now it's like these two things are happening at once or completely preceded by. So like social media could be, people are existing now. Like I have a niece, she's 2. She will grow up in a world where, she's on, through my sister, but she's on Instagram now. Like, she doesn't have her own account, but there are pictures of my 2-year-old niece and my sister that go up every single day. I never had that. Pictures of me when I'm 2 are in like a dusty and probably black and white. I don't know why. There was definitely color photos in the early 90s, but I just imagined them to be black and white in a binder somewhere with my mom writing the date and where we were on the back of these photos. So
that's something that sorry to cut you off, but that's something that no family will ever have. I remember opening up photo albums. I used to love like going to the top of a bookcase, opening up a photo album and just trying to find, Caravan Holiday 96. Yeah. And like, it's just, there's something so, I don't know, like heartwarming about that you don't get from scrolling up an Instagram feed.
Yeah, it's tactile, it's real, it's anchoring. It leads you to it doesn't exist in a cloud. right? Like it can't be deleted. I think there's a permanence to it that we like.
Mm.
There's a permanence to the analog, to the physical that keeps our boots on the ground. Because yeah, like a cloud could get hacked and you're all of a sudden you could just disappear. I compare it, and again, so maybe give you some insight to how much I spend time figuring out comparisons between shit. But in like, I want to say it's the 6th Harry Potter movie where Hermione has to like disappear to save her family. And then she's in her house with her parents and she does a little thing with the stick, and all of a sudden all the pictures of her with her family, she just disappears, and it's just pictures of her mom and dad together. Like, I think that's what scares us, is like, if it doesn't exist digitally and we've externalized this memory to a hard drive, and that hard drive disappears, maybe our memory disappears. Like, I think it ultimately leaves itself open to impermanence. Like it leaves ourselves open to just being forgotten, which is kind of scary.
I still think I'm not full on, David Icke conspiracy theorist level of like feeling like worried about what's available information about me on the internet, but I do get like quite concerned when like people view the internet as their information of everybody else. I remember a little while ago where I was with until last year, I've been with my fiance 7 years, and we got engaged last February. And it's the only time we were Facebook official. She said she wanted to change it when she got engaged. And like we weren't. And I remember like a year ago, her sister rang us. Is everything okay? It's you and Simon. It doesn't show on Facebook. I'm like, it's never shown on Facebook. And it's that sort of like, it didn't happen unless it was shown online. And I'm just like, certainly in the last year, I'm like, there's lots of things on the internet now. I'm like, I don't know how much I want this.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, it's where we live, right? It's something that's resonated with me. The movie The Social Network is always one I revert back to more than a disproportionate amount for the number of times I've watched it. But there's a weird quote where like Timberlake's character, the guy who started Napster, whatever the fuck his name is, he's like, before we lived on farms, now we live in cities, now we're going to live on the internet. Which, like, it struck me as very like Orwellian, but at the same time, it's also been like it's been a helpful sentiment, like especially with the work side of things. And it's always a conversation I have with people like aspiring to mix social media with a business pursuit. It's like, when I was making money in California, I was living in California. I had an office and I was working at Stanford and I was working at Apple and all that shit. When I was making money in Toronto, I was living in Toronto. And a lot of people, if they want to make money on the internet, it's like, well, you have to live on the internet, right? So it is difficult to take this omnipotent, or not omnipotent, but this ever-present or omnipresent thing and make it a physical locale. And there are things from a business perspective that I think you need to subscribe to in as far as practices online. But yeah, the melding of the interpersonal, like, just as if I were to walk into a normal 9-to-5 office space, and like there would be a certain level of voyeurism that was seen intrusive, like holding that close to your chest and maintaining that, I think for me anyways, and it might just be a generational thing, is important. Like I think it's good to have, and not to be disingenuous, but like to have your life outside social media. Like Tess and I have been together for 9 months and I don't think we're even friends on Facebook. Like I have no idea. But yeah, it's odd. The voyeurism is a little unsettling, but I think you become more settled when you just become more settled with yourself. Like you're also like, okay. I because that clearly occupied more space in her head than it did yours.
Yeah.
Right. To like pick up the phone and be like, is everything okay? It's like,
yeah.
Don't you have like, is your stove on right now? Do you know where your kids are? Like, why is this the preeminent thought in your head right now?
Do you think like you going into that sort of like living on the internet sort of thing, do you think there is an advantage for people that have grown up in this internet generation that it becomes more second nature to them? Or do you think there's a big disadvantage now of people lacking more resourcefulness because everything can be immediate? If I want to watch a movie, I go on Netflix. I want to get food, I go on delivery. You know, this delayed gratification. Do you think there's less of that now than maybe when you were growing up?
Undoubtedly, yes. Whether or not it's a problem will only be a problem if that access somehow abruptly goes away. Right? Like, if Uber still exists forever, is it a problem that kids these days don't know how to change a tire? Like, probably not, until it is, and then you're fucked, right? Which is like, and I don't want to, because that thought process quickly spirals into hoarding canned foods and preserves and like just hiding in your fucking basement with a bunch of ammunition. So it's like, I think there's a line to draw. I think ultimately we're at a unique, you and I are of a unique generation where we can benefit from having our feet in the ground before we start fucking off with our head in the clouds, where it's fine if you never have to land. Like, if you're a kid that grows up in it and it just keeps trending, and then who knows, maybe in 30 years there'll be a crazier, unpredictable amalgamation of technology and human beings, where you can look back at TikTok like a very analog, a very wholesome, remember when we used to go on TikTok type thing. So it's like, I wouldn't time will tell ultimately. But I think if one thing, like, I remember having a Blu-ray player for like a week, and then Blu-rays were obsolete, and I was like, wait a minute, that didn't take long. Like, I had VCRs my entire life, and then all of a sudden I had Blu-ray for like a week, and then everything seemed to be like going digital very quickly after that. And I was like, I started to noticing like the doubling rate, or like the half-life, maybe another way to look at it, becoming very, very short, to the point where it's like, well, I can't accurately predict how this trend is going to unfold over the next 20, 30 years. So I think where people are at now compared to where we were at, it can be an advantage as that indoctrination is more seamless. Like, I know kids on TikTok that are making a bunch of money, and hey, good for you. Until TikTok, if for whatever reason, goes away, and then you might be fucked. But as long as it doesn't go away and it seems to evolve, and humans seem to evolve along with it, I think they'll be fine. And I don't want to think that either. Like, I want to think like, oh, you kids are going to need to know how to rub two sticks together and make fire. It's like, you curmudgeon old fuck. Like, that's never going to happen. If it does, then I'll just burn everyone else's down and take their food. But like, if it doesn't, then I'll just sit there and be kind of upset. But I don't think it's necessarily an advantage or disadvantage, because, obviously to a certain degree, they're advantage because, they are more comfortable and they don't have to, like, I had to get Tess to explain to me how to post a reel the other day. I was like, what the fuck is this? And she's like, ah, you old man, like, come here. And so she had to show me, but there are times where
we don't get them here.
Oh, bless. Jeez. That's insane. I forget about that.
I don't get Instagram music either.
Wild.
Yeah, so like, if there's ever a music on any of your stories, I don't get it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wild times. But I think it's a wash. And it's a positive if you play your situation to be a positive. Like, I think the way we use social media and superimpose maybe like our values, which is a word that's come up more than a handful of times, and impart that in the way we conduct ourselves, then it's a positive. But I think if someone, might have a better aptitude and less of an aversion to going on social media because they were indoctrinated into it, then that's a positive. It's really just, are you playing to your strengths ultimately?
Yeah. I going back into VHS, that goes back into so many memories. It's like, there's a whole generation of people that's never had to blow into their VCR player to try and get The Simpsons to work.
Right.
I remember getting so frustrated at an N64 because GoldenEye wouldn't work unless I blew on it like 400 times.
It's amazing how that worked, though.
I don't know where it started. Is there a logic behind that, or did someone just try it one day and just like, this works, and then Chinese whispers got out?
Right. Yeah, I don't know, but also too, like, it's just turn it off and turn it on again, no matter how technically complex. Like, I was on a plane from San Francisco to Toronto last year. It was a 7 a.m. flight. I've taken that flight 100 times. And Silicon Valley, like San Francisco, is where like the internet was essentially invented. And it's a 777. Like, this thing's got 300 people on it, maybe a bit more. It's a big fucking plane. And, you know, the usual waiting to taxi back from the jetway sort of thing. And like the pilot comes on the PA system there and is, you know, we're having some technical issues with the plane. We're going to turn it off and turn it back on again. I'm like, if that works, I'm getting off the plane. Like, if whatever, it has to be more complicated than that. Like, it has to, this giant tin can that will hurl through space at, I don't know, 600 kilometers an hour at 41,000 feet. It's like, if that is the solution, then it wasn't that severe of a problem. Like, I just felt so uncomfortably entire. Every bump, I was like, oh fuck, there goes the computer again. I have to turn this thing off in the middle of the air. But yeah, there's certain things, there's novelties you miss, right? There's simple, and maybe we're just being nostalgic, and maybe those things still exist in a more present form. But yeah, there's something really cathartic about just taking the N64 out,
yeah,
and then putting it back in. I think maybe it's because it felt like you had some control over the outcome.
Yeah,
that you don't have that now. Like, there's no physical thing. It's much to our conversation about like the tangibility of the photo album. It's just like, if it deletes, it deletes. Like, if your house lights on fire and the thing goes up in flames, your photo album goes up in flames. That's one thing, but that's about what it would take to get rid of a photo album, because it's like, who's breaking in and stealing your photo albums? But someone would absolutely, you know, hack your thing, your iCloud, and then all of a sudden you don't have access to your photos anymore.
Yeah. I think that's big, like going into sort of like maybe being nostalgic with this sort of stuff. But there's probably is things like that now, where that, you know, there's just different nostalgia. What we're nostalgia for, and what we think is just modern and like, you know, moving quickly, is what other people feel exactly the same. The N64 equivalent. This is what MySpace is for some people now.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, time will, and we see things in like a cyclical fashion, right? Like, you talk to anyone about, obviously, like, the current COVID situation is in itself unique. And I think technology is part of like the fractured orbit, but we had this before, like Hong Kong flu back in 69, right? Even in recent iterations, like Ebola virus and Zika virus and all these things that could have been potentially, you know, this thing we have today. But yeah, it's modern iterations of it. And it's also like at what age you are when you intercept these things. Like, I feel like 30 always has this feeling of like, regardless of, you know, in the last 200 years, I'm sure 30 has felt the same for everyone that's been 30. Like, you accumulate a bit of experience, you accumulate a bit of knowledge, you've been around, you talk to some people, you kind of know a little bit about some stuff. And then you can start to put some pieces together. Like, this is insane. This is ridiculous. This is how the world works. Are you fucking kidding me? And I'm sure that's just how it was, you know. That's how 30's always been. This is just our time for 30. And then when we're 50, we'll say the same shit as at 50-year-olds when we were kids talking to 50-year-olds. It's almost just like, I'm confident that time isn't linear. Like that, and being comfortable with the fact that that's an uncomfortable thing to feel has helped in me navigating this. It's like, whatever. This is just how being 30 is for everyone. And there's just crazy shit you're aware of that you weren't aware of before. And this is just our crazy shit for our 30. But other 30s, like, imagine being 30 in 1938. That would have been literally insane. That would have been the craziest type of different crazy, where so you take someone from 38 and you put them here and be like, this is nuts. Like, how the fuck are you guys dealing with all these cell phones and news and all this stuff? I'd much rather have a foxhole with a rifle. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It's
I suppose you look at it two ways. Like, you can look at it, you can look at it two ways, I suppose, in terms of like the acceleration. I was thinking earlier on, I was like, do you feel it's been accelerated? Like, you were saying, like, we know some stuff and you start to understand how the world works. And I feel like, yes, things like viruses have been cyclical, but like, because of the importance of social media now during this recent pandemic, and this is the reason why it's become a global pandemic, right? And everything else got global because you wouldn't even heard about it. You know, Ebola 30 years ago, you might have heard a little bit on the news, but that's sort of it. This has sort of exploded. And we now see the world being very divided because it just opened up every hole that's in politicians, world leaders. These holes have come up for people to go in and explore. And I wonder that, like, we're at 30 years old, when we start to know some stuff, it's almost quite dangerous being exposed to things that we maybe should not be privy to, that like just a massive global cock up will actually do to you. And like that's why so many people are going down so many rabbit holes now.
Yeah, I I think this ends like one of four ways. We end up on Mars. We end up living in small homogenous communities again. We end up just giving up to or forgiving ourselves or forfeiting ourselves to like the inevitable symbiosis fully of technology. We all just become AI in the machine, or North Korea turns two keys and we all just go back to the Stone Age. Like that's, but I also like the idea because we romanticized figures in history because we didn't have those little rat holes to peep into. Like just imagine Churchill's Twitter feed. Like just imagine his DMs. Like Churchill's definitely sending dick pics. Like 1000%. If that technology was available to that man, his horn would be all across the fucking UK without a doubt.
I don't even think just Churchill. I think the amount of people that are squeaky clean on social media, they get caught out by, let's say, an iCloud hack. I want to see what like Gandhi was up to behind closed doors.
Yeah,
like that's
probably a freak.
Yeah,
but I mean, I don't know. I like looking retroactively at that and being like, yeah, whatever. It's just human beings being human beings. But like, I don't think, what was the Shakespeare, like all the world's a stage sort of thing. Now the social media gives us all a chance to be actors, which for better or for worse is maybe not the best thing. But yeah, it has been an interesting couple of years because of I think the pitch and the magnitude and the frequency of like this voyeurism has allowed you to really kind of pull the face back on everything and be like, this is just absurd. And it comes back to the control thing. It's like, you can either think that you can control it, or you can come to the grips with the fact that no one ever has been in control. And you just be like, kind of just give up the fear that comes with knowing you're not in control and just like, all right, I'm going to go do whatever the fuck I want anyways. That seems to be what everyone else is doing. So why not me?
Yeah, 100%. I think this almost gives you like a little bit of a segue what we're saying we were going to talk about before we went on. Like going into like looking at trying to piece together this world, understanding some stuff at the age of 30. And I've wanted to chat to you about this for a while because I keep hearing you bring up the topic of psychedelics on, numerous podcasts, but we never ever hear about your side of the story. So like what is your experience with them? How have they helped you become the guy you are at 30 or not? Like,
I don't know. It's a weird one because it's a very podcastable topic. Now, like I never did any drugs growing up. Like I've never smoked weed, never did anything. I haven't drank in 13 years. Like I stopped drinking when I was a teenager. So like I started to take and I don't take a lot and I don't have much experience with them, but like I take drugs because they're fun. Like that was honestly how it started, was like, this seems like fun. I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that it's medicine. Like, sure, it's medicine in the sense that medicine has side effects, but like, a unified stoned ape theory that we've expanded our frontal cortex because of mushrooms is like, I don't know, maybe I'm not taking the right mushrooms when I was taking them, but it's like, I think it's just a side effect. Like, yeah, you can feel a certain way if you take promethazine too. Like, I'm not just sitting there, but I'm not going to preach fucking lean and Zerp because it makes me feel different. So I think first and foremost, like in talking about the conversation around like drugs in general, there's always like, I don't want to say a preface, but there's always a disclaimer for me where it's like, I consider performance enhancing drugs, right? Like I think the same way about performance enhancing drugs that I think about like psychedelics and acid and mushrooms and shit like that, because I know plenty of kids who, walked into the gym the first day and it was like, where's the Stanozol at? Right. Where's the Winstrol? Then they're decently lean. And then, maybe they get to 90 kilos and they got abs and it's like, okay, great. And then the Winstrol goes away and then the abs go away and the bicep vein goes away. But then there's like, you slog it for a decade and you figure out nutrition and you figure out how to train and execute movements. And maybe you've fuck your way through some periodization that makes sense. And you start to actually see some progress. Then you throw some gear at it because you're not competing in anything anymore. And you put on like, now you got a fucking rig on you because you did the long, hard yards first, right? And it's like in the world of like, psychedelics and podcasts and things like that, the hard yards for me anyways, in like, in that sphere of development is like, go to therapy for like 6 or 7 years, figure your shit out, sit down and like poke around in these corners when you don't have a drug forcing you to like deal with shit. Then when you take drugs, it's like, dude, drugs are blah. Like, I have friends who are like afraid to take like psychedelics or afraid to take mushrooms and all that. And I get it. Like, I 100%, when I took them the first time, I was like, what the fuck is this going to do? Right. Like, there's a fear, but there was no fear in like what was going to come up. Like, I'm pretty self-aware after, I don't know, like 7 years of therapy, talking to a shrink like every week, where my downfalls are. Like, I'm not like, I've cheddar bobbed myself, or I've 8-miled myself, where it's like, I know all the things that I suck at. Like, I know the things that, my proclivity to avoid certain topics or to act a certain way in certain situations. Like, I'm pretty self-aware because I've done like what I would consider the hard yards, that if, I have some sort of revelation because I don't know, dome 2 grams of mushrooms or something like that, it's really kind of just exacerbating something I was already aware of, rather than just being like, oh man, like, I didn't know that I had commitment or abandonment issues until I took this drug. It's like, that's a problem. Like, if you're finding yourself in a cap of a thing that grows in shit, it's like, that should tell you about the way you've been addressing your psychological state up to the point of taking drugs. I feel like it's the same reason people take any drug. It's like, that's not a fair statement, but I feel like it can just be used as like a cop out from like actually doing the hard yards and doing the work. So it's like, people, there's a very woke, spiritual gangster social media thing about mushrooms and psychedelics and stuff. And I think it's just people, it's the equivalent of like the YouTube in the fitness industry, where it's like, there's bodybuilders that are like the sharks, and then there's like these little fish that go in and eat out of the teeth of the thing that did the hard work to actually kill the thing that everyone else is living off of. Like, it's the same way with drugs and like psychedelics and social media. It's just like, people are, habitually, like, to a point where it's like, you have an addiction. Like, I know people in very, prominent figures in our space that have done 200 plus ayahuasca ceremonies. Like,
how much stuff could you need to sort out to do 200?
Well, it's not even sorting anything out at that point. It's like, you're missing the fucking boat, man. Like, if it's supposed to be this, come to Jesus, shoot out of your own body, craziest 5 minutes of your life thing. And I've never done it, but it's like, you're just a drug addict, right? Like, you're not, like, it's not helpful at all. Like, you have a problem, you should go to meetings. So for me, it's just, it's a weird romanticized thing where it's like, I don't think people talk about it from the other side. It's like, if the end result is, balance or centeredness or whatever your desired result around, ingesting these types of drugs is, it's like, are you augmenting for a problem in your immediate reality with drugs? Because that's what most people do, right? There's to me, there's no difference between, the guy who grows his hair out and quits his day job because he started doing mushrooms and like starts preaching about it being medicine. Like, and it's the second someone's like, oh, it's medicine, I was like, you've lost me. Like, have you ever had like, a really good antibiotic is medicine? If you've ever just been like riddled with it and you get yourself on a good fluoroquinolone or something like that, just cures what ails you, that's medicine. These are drugs, right? Like, these are, and like, I don't want to take anything away from them. Like, I've definitely gotten a lot out of like the few times where I've, dosed a little heavier on purpose, but I got a lot out of it because I've, fucking sat down and talk to a professional for however many years. It's like, it's no different than training. It's like, yeah, you can get a lot out of a bottle of Stanozol, but you can get more out of a bottle of Stanozol if you're Marion Jones, right? Like if you've been running your whole life and then you take Winstrol, you'll break a world record. But if you haven't been training at all and you take Winstrol, you'll fucking get a bicep vein.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the same thing with the psychedelic, I don't want to say movement, but there has been a push where it's like, oh, look, it's natural, we should legalize. It's like, yeah, whatever, do whatever the fuck you want. Like, I don't really care. But understand, I think that where the benefit really is going to lie is in all the yards you put in prior to just, doming a few drugs.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison looking at the anabolics route. Like, I've worked with many people that have done anabolics, and some of them are the healthiest people I will ever know. And they're the people who are probably much healthier than the people that are going out get smashed on a weekend. They're the people who get the blood work done every 6 months. And there's two kinds of people, I think, that take performance enhancing drugs. They're the people that go, right, I've taken my training to this level. I've now picked my poison. I'm probably not going to go out partying as much on the drinking side, but I'm going to push this. And there's the person that goes, I don't like this dieting lark. Maybe if I take a load of Clen and some Anavar and a bit of test prop, then I won't need to diet. And they're the people that end up on the Sunday Times going, steroids killed my baby.
Right, yeah.
It's same thing in terms of, I think with the hallucinogenic drugs thing, it's like I've dabbled in a bit of acid over the last few years. It's part of moving to a new country, right? You find a remote little island, and you learn more about yourself. But I think for the people I've seen, like the stories I've heard, people who go in wanting something, often they're the people that they can't deal with it, or they struggle with it. I know, like the closest thing I ever had to a bad trip was the first time I took it, and it was I was so nervous about it, and I was so couldn't just let go and just enjoy it, that I was trying to find things in my surroundings that I was familiar with. So I saw the guy on the beach doing bicep curls with a band. I was like, I'm going to look at him because he's doing training stuff, and I know training stuff, and I was finding normality. And like, I was feeling relaxed. And my mate was like, Simon, let go. I'm just like this, and like, once you sort of let yourself into that, then it becomes fun and interesting. But that's I think the part of the reason why I've always enjoyed them is because I've never felt I've needed necessarily. There probably are. If I went to a therapist, there's probably things I need to talk through, but there's nothing groundbreaking that I'm like, I really need some help. I need to shit myself in the jungle for 4 hours to get some help.
Right? Yeah, it's interesting because even that to me is like, there could be not like a lesson, but if you're comfortable enough in being like, like I kind of got everything sorted, I can have some tough conversations with myself. But like I've had a similar experience on I took 2 hits of acid once, and it's like, it's the best whenever you're with people. Like, I don't procure any of this. Like, my friends have it and they just live wild lives, and they're like, none of them are pharmacists, but the drug math always makes me laugh. Like, whenever I'm in a situation where the potential of me doing, psychedelic drugs is there, there's always someone who's like self-appointed shaman for the evening. Yes. It's like, oh, and I love this. Like, how much do you weigh? Like, what are you going to do? Well, you're either giving me 1 hit or you're giving me 2 hits. And it's like, I have I'm very much in control of my devices. And like my friend, and bless her soul, she knows how heavy I am, and she knows that she's like half or less than half my body weight. And she's like, oh, you're big, I'll give you 2 hits. And it's like, wait, hold on. Can you tell me how you arrived at that? Like, I don't think that's how the brain works. So next thing you know, I'm fucking 2 hits of acid deep, and I don't feel it at first. And then I'm at this charcuterie board hipster restaurant, and it just hits me like a ton of bricks. Like, literally, I was sober I was placing my order. And then when I sat down, I was to the fucking moon. And that was one thing that I had to get comfortable with, was like being uncomfortable. Like, because you're just looking over the edge and thinking, certainly I'm just going to fall into a pit of unconsciousness, but it just keeps you there. That's an interesting thing about like those drugs, is that you're just teetering over some ledge, and you're like, I'm going to fall. And much to your point about like just like letting go thing, it's just like, maybe this is what my whole life is actually like. where I'm actually just teetering on some edge forever. And I just go, yeah, fuck it, whatever. And then that was the rest of my night, was me just sitting there going, I'm fucking blasted. I was like, are you familiar with the Escher's hands drawing hands?
Yeah.
It's a picture of and you don't know where it starts or where it ends. Like the one thing I kept thinking in days after was like, I was simultaneously the marathon runner and the guy on the side of the road cheering him on. Like I was handing myself water as I was running. And it was just like, I don't know. It was interesting. And like, not that I didn't do it for any other reason than it seemed like it'd be fun. My friend was like, hey, do you want to do, like, literally we were sitting around doing some work. It was 6 o'clock in the evening. And my friend walked in with a couple of baggies with some stuff in it. And she's like, hey, do you want to do acid tonight? And I was like, all right. And it wasn't like, and I literally like one of my buddies I was with, and I pride myself in, you know, the friends that I have. And a lot of times I look around at my friend group and go like, well, I must be doing something right. Unless I'm just some weird Truman Show thing where like, this is all just a laugh. But I don't care. I get to be along for the ride.
That's an acid story to have going into the Truman Show.
Oh my God, fucking hell. But, and one of my buddies was just like, all right. And like, we're all sitting there with these hits of acid and we're just like, he's like, all right, no learning. I was like, what? He's like, let's just have a silly goose time. Like, let's just not like, and because we all have our shit together. Like, we're all, you know, I'd like to think pretty conscious and conscientious, like people. And we have, especially that friend group I was in, like we have pretty deep conversations on the regular. And it was like, the work is done. Let's celebrate. Like, let's just have a few hits of acid and go out into public. Oh, fuck. But it was fun, but it, you know, it was undoubtedly revelatory in the sense of like, you know, maybe this is what my life is like. Maybe I'm unaware of the ledges I'm standing on and the fact that I don't have any control. And I'm just like, oh, I'll just stand here and enjoy the ride. But yeah, I mean, the psychedelic thing it's funny because the language around it makes so much sense when you do them. Like the only thing that can come to mind when I talk about it is like, yeah, it's a trip. It's a fucking trip. It's definitely that. But I think, I don't know, drugs never get touted as being fun. They always just get, especially like that class of drugs. Like I'm sure heroin's terrible. Like don't do that. But like when it comes to psychedelic drugs, and I'm very much like, you know, I've had a few, I would say maybe 6 times where it was like, whoa, we're melting here. I'm turning into furniture. But, you know, I've had, you know, therapy at least once a week for 6 or 7 years. So it's like, yeah, the couple hits of acid and the mushrooms, and that was a good time. It was good. There's a lot of therapy sessions that weren't a good time.
Yeah.
That were, especially when you're 26 years old, homeless, divorced, living on a floor of your office, or working on weekends just to get flown to a place to stay in a hotel so you don't have to shower in the gym that you work out at. It's like, yeah, those suck. But acid trips were dope.
Yeah. Those are the things that aren't going to like solve all those world problems. But I think it's really interesting going, like, I think that's what I took away from the experience. It's almost like learning to just be like, right, I could sit here and stress about this and not let go and have a horrible time, but it's lasting for 12 hours, whether I do or I don't.
Right.
So like learn. And I remember like the first time I did it, and like, we spoke about this before, my terrible mobility through my shoulder. And I remember just like placing my hand on my side. I was like, it feels like there's a hole in my chest. Like, what the fuck? There's a hole in my chest. And then I just realized, this is as it was winding down. And I was like, no, this is just how my chest is supposed to move, and it's not rock solid attached by my nervous system. Like, man, maybe I'm more stressed than I think I am. You know, we were watching this, there's a theme park here called Ocean Park, and it felt like it was like 50 meters away. And then by the end of like 12 hours, it almost like the whole island had moved. You know, it was like absolutely mental. But
oh, it's the best. Yeah,
I think they say the biggest thing is like that. Is like for me, it was I felt I got to know my mates more in 12 hours than I did 2.5 years. Like being into those stories, really listening to them, feeling like you're right there, like you're right next to that person running the marathon. And I think I agree with you. I think those things aren't aren't talked about enough because it's this self-discovery thing all the time rather than just enjoying yourself for what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's like, I don't know, if the whole idea is being more present, then going in with an agenda is antithetical to that idea. It's like, man, I don't know. Like, I never thought that like I would get super blasted and then just think about like the Escher's hand drawing hands thing. I was messaging someone about the trip while I was tripping.
Do you feel that you can focus? Because I know that like I can be like melted into something, and if I have to text somebody, I can be completely with it, and then I put my phone down and I'm gone.
Depends on the drug.
Yeah.
I found acid was like acid. I can be that. Like, I went to get up and order like just a bottle of water or something, and like sitting at the table static was a concern. I was like, there's no fucking way I'm going to be able to get up, walk over there, stand in line, not look weird, articulate, pull out my wallet, pay for something, and sit back down. But then the guy on the side of the marathon was like, you can do it, buddy. You can do it. And the next thing you know, I'm up there and I'm like, I'm fucking, this is happening. But on the outward, I would imagine, and maybe the security camera footage would look different, but I was like, I'm so fucked, but I'm sure I look so normal. Where like mushrooms, I don't think I'd be able to. Like, if I was that equivalently blasted on mushrooms and I had like I don't want to say an unexpected trip, but I did like a mushroom chocolate edible that I think was dosed improperly, and I had to go to work, and I was fucking completely melted. Luckily, I've done my job, and this was with like a very high profile client, a really high profile client, and you can never know about it. And for like, I was at my peak state of like inebriation, let's say, as I walked in the door to meet with him, and I was like, this is terrible. It's amazing, but it's also terrible. And I was like, I freaking run autopilot on manual therapy quite well because I've done it so many times.
Yeah.
But I think it depends a little bit on the drug, but it's never boring, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, do you feel that like going through, like, almost like wrapping this up in a bit, because I know that you're getting towards the end of the time you've got available. I don't want to keep you as much as I could talk about this all day. But do you feel like going, like, you mentioned having therapy for 4 or 5 years, like on a weekly basis? Do you feel like going through, like you mentioned, where you grew up was a rough place, and I can relate, coming from Wolverhampton. Do you feel that helps you get more out of those sort of things, whether it's just like hallucinogenic drugs, whether it's life in general? Like, do you feel it's like, if we're going into the nature versus nurture debate, do you feel like it's the life experiences have got Jordan Shallow to where he is today? Or do you feel it's more, the family you had and like a little bit of...
I think you can better put into perspective the life experience when you come from a place like we have, because it's like, everything is amazing to me. Like, everything is ridiculous. Like, everything is the craziest thing ever. Every day I'm like, this is fucking insane. Because I grew up in a place where it's like, I lived in like a decent neighborhood, but 5 blocks from my house, one of my closest friends lived in a neighborhood that was housing projects, like one road in, one road out. And other than him, he's like now a nurse and works in a hospital, every other kid our age or 5 years older and 5 years younger is dead or in jail. Like, and that's not being hyperbolic. Like, that is 100% the case, that he is the only person who is alive out in the outside world. If they're still alive, they're in prison. So it's like, if that was the potential future that you had and your life is anything but that, it's fucking amazing. And like, I grew up in a city where it was, if you looked up, it was gray, there were smokestacks, it was factories, everyone was working 12-hour shifts. They were either on nights or on days. They built cars, or seat belts or shit for cars. That was it. So it's like, the fact that I can come here and sit in this like ridiculous studio and talk to you, who's in Hong Kong. And I've been to Hong Kong. I actually have the Hong Kong Ferris wheel tattooed on my finger.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So like, hey?
That's where I got engaged, on the Hong Kong.
Get the fuck out. I have Big Ben here as well. I got Big Ben. So it's just like, the fact that I've been to all these ridiculous places, it's just, it helps put in, I think, better perspective. Where if I had grown up with like And nothing like some of the worldliest people I know with the greatest perspective and the most appreciation for everything, even the smallest little, interaction with a passerby are friends who grew up in well-to-do households. Like some of my most cerebral, switched on, appreciative friends grew up with, on planes. And I don't mean like Delta, like I mean their relatives own 737 planes. And it's like when they go on vacation, they just take their uncle's plane. So I don't think being broke gives you a license to morality by any stretch of the imagination. But I think for me, it's helpful to just be like, yeah, I never thought any of this was even real. Like I didn't know. I remember seeing the Sydney Opera House, which I have on one of these fingers. I got it on that one for the first time. Going, I didn't know what to expect because I saw it in the 2000 Olympics, and I was like, "There's no fucking way I'm ever going to see this in real life." I thought I was just going to see the inside of a factory forever, work at a dock or something like that. So yeah, I think for me it's been helpful, but I think regardless of your situation, whether you grow up in like, super affluent parts of the world or, in good circumstances or not so good circumstances, you can use anything to your advantage. It's whether or not you choose to do so is kind of the differentiating factor. Because like I said, I have friends that are, grew up way worse than me, and I have friends who grew up way better off, and they just made what they deem to be the right choices, and our right choices sort of align and coalesce and resonate. But for me, it's definitely been like an upper hand because it's even on shitty days, I'm not working in a factory, so it's like, well, that right there is a win.
What do you reckon made you different? Because you mentioned working in a factory a couple of times, being like this is what you didn't want to do. And you said before on podcasts that people tend to grow up and live down the road from the parents. They stay in Windsor. So what is it you think made you different to actually want to explore and go out?
Because my parents didn't grow up down the street from their parents. I think that's what it was, right? Because my parents were both the youngest in their families, and they're the only ones that left the island, right? So like I was the sort of the nomad, just pick it up and figure it out. I grew up in that. Like if I had to go see grandma, it wasn't down the street. It was, a 6-7 hour flight. So all my friends growing up, the nuclear family extended outside of just mom, dad, and whatever siblings you had. So for me, it was like family, like extended family is not like a distant construct. Like we would see them once or twice a year, but it's not like, we're going over for every holiday. It's not like I got to go mow grandma's lawn or anything like that. So it was definitely like, I knew it could be done. It was like the Roger Bannister thing. It's like, well, yeah, it's just what you did, right? Like my parents, we stayed as close to our extended family as we could by being so separated geographically, right? Like we were probably, I don't know, 3,000 kilometers away at any given point in time. So that was just accepted as like a normal, where if my grandma had lived down the street and my mom had decided to buy a house 6 houses down from her mom, and then my dad's mom, and everyone knew each other, I would maybe accept that as a little bit more uniform. But to me, my normal was, well, yeah, my parents left to find, and not like a weird, it's because it sounds like a weird immigrant story, not weird, but like the fact they lived within Canada, but they left Newfoundland for a better life for me and my sister. So I didn't have to work in a timber mill or something like that, or fisheries or something like that. And then I was like, well, you have to do that to find a better life. And I was like, all right, well, I'm done with undergrad now. I should probably go find that better life now. And my sister left when she was 17, university down in the States. And I left for grad school to California when I was 20. So I think it was really, to your meta line of thinking around nature versus nurture, I think nurture had like a big impact on that. Now, what caused my parents, one of 5 and one of 7 siblings, to be the only ones in their respective family to decide to make that jump? I think that would be an interesting thing to delve into, because there's no precedent for them to have to or want to leave. But for me, I think it was all nurture. Like that was just kind of what I knew. Like that's how you did it. That was like your Joseph Campbell's hero's journey type thing. I was like, all right, off you get.
I suppose it's that desire of almost knowing there's more. Like the Roger Bannister thing about, knowing that, it can be done is a big thing. And I think your Sydney Sydney Opera House reference resonates with me. Like, I remember getting off the plane here and just first time looking over this view of like the Hong Kong harbour, and it's still, I can walk there, you know, in 10 minutes, and I see it almost every day, and I don't get over the fact that I'm here. And
literally, dude, that one's so epic too. Like that is because like London is a proper city. Like, you know, you got Big Ben and you got the Eye, but there's something about Kowloon. The view over the peak is just fucking biblical. Like that is, if like for those listening who've never been there, I don't think there's a vantage point in the world that quite hits like fucking Hong Kong does. It's a different animal
everywhere. Like outside of my window to the left here, it's dark now, but like you just have islands, and you know, and like, you know, if you ever back and you want, you know, like actual warm chicken, we can cook it. It's just unbelievable. Like you look and it's like being in, you know, Vietnam Islands, and then next moment you're in Asian New York, and next moment you're on a mountain. You can do it all in a day. It's just believe it. You know, small boy from Wolverhampton, a city that was voted by the Sunday Times the 4th worst city in the world, 3rd being Baghdad, 5th being Chechnya. Now I think
you're
it's a
in
little
good
bit
company there.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but you know, I can sort of see it.
Yeah, that's tongue in cheek would be the order of the day for you guys, though. That's a very British thing to write.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think Baghdad's list has Northampton. I don't think it has your neighborhood on it.
No, probably not. Probably not. I mean, most media outlets have probably been blown up, so if it is, you probably can't find it.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, man, I'll let you get on with the rest of your day because I know how busy you are. But for anyone who doesn't know you, although I think most people listening to me probably do, where can we find you? Tell us about our skill acquisition course, is the one just coming up.
Right. Yeah, skill acquisition starts this afternoon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we have, Prescript is where we serve all of our educational content. So www.pre-script.com, Instagram at @the_muscle_doc. If you guys have any direct questions, just shoot me an email, jordan@themuscledoc.com. Pretty accessible through there. But I appreciate you taking the time, man. This has been a long time in the works. It's good to see you. Appreciate you putting this together.
Thank you very much, man. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you very much for your time.
Of course, man. We'll chat soon.